Hello, this is a new type of endeavor for the channel. I have a good friend here, Antioch, and we're going to be reading the 50th Psalm. And the reason we're doing this is because a couple weeks ago we found something in this psalm, a few characteristics in it, which we find really interesting and which we want to share with the brethren. And we're just going to read through the psalm. This isn't going to be structured, this isn't a commentary. I have a few notes, but they're basically just bullet points and a few cross references. Antioch has a few of his own. So we're going to go through the psalm. We're going to start off by reading it, and then we're just going to discuss it verse by verse. And that's what it's going to be. Antioch, do you want to introduce yourself or anything before we get started?
I just want to say that the reason this psalm is important is because it easily cross-references to other important CI verses, such as Malachi chapter 2, John chapter 8. It easily cross-references to those verses, and that's why it's important to us. It needs to be in every CI adherent needs to keep this in mind, this psalm.
Yeah, we were talking about this psalm a couple weeks ago, and we were finding things, and our jaws are basically on the floor. Like, this psalm is the John 8 psalm. This is the Malachi 1 psalm. Yeah. This is a great psalm. They're all great, but this is something really profound for dual seed line. So this is
exactly.
This is a CI psalm.
It's all there. In this psalm, it's all there, and that's why it's important for dual seed line. Everything's there in this psalm, so we're going to show why.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, you want to get reading?
All right. A psalm of Asaph, the mighty God, even Yahweh hath spoken and called the earth from the rising of the sun unto the going down thereof. Out of Zion, the perfection of beauty, God hath shined. Our God shall come and shall not keep silence. A fire shall devour before him, and it shall be very tempestuous round about him. He shall call to the heavens from above, and to the earth, that he may judge his people. Gather my saints together unto me, those that have made a covenant with me by sacrifice. And the heaven shall declare his righteousness, for God is judge himself. Salah. Hear, O my people, and I will speak. O Israel, and I will testify against thee. I am God, even thy God. I will not reprove thee for thy sacrifices or thy burnt offerings, to have been continually before me. I will take no bullock out of thy house, nor he-goats out of thy folds. For every beast of the forest is mine, and the cattle upon 1,000 hills. I know all the fowls of the mountains, and the wild beasts of the field are mine. If I were hungry, I would not tell thee, for the world is mine and the fullness thereof. Will I eat the flesh of bulls or drink the blood of goats? Offer unto God thanksgiving and pay thy vows unto the Most High, and call upon me in the day of trouble. I will deliver thee, and thou shalt glorify me. But unto the wicked God saith, What hast thou to do to declare my statutes, or that thou shouldest take my covenant in thy mouth, seeing thou hatest instruction and castest my words behind thee? When thou sawest a thief, then thou contendest with him, and hast been partaker with adulterers. Thou givest thy mouth to evil, and thy tongue frameth deceit. Thou sittest and speakest against thy brother, thou slanderest thine own mother's son. Thy slander, thine own mother's son. These things hast thou done, and I kept silence. Thou thoughtest that I was thou thoughtest that I was altogether such an one as thyself. But I will reprove thee and set them in order before thine eyes. Now consider this, ye that forget God, lest I tear ye in pieces, and there be none to deliver. Whoso offereth praise glorifieth me, and to him that ordereth his conversation aright will I show the salvation of God. Some archaic language in the KJV.
Yeah, that King James language is difficult. You know, when I'm reading it, if it says thyself, I say yourself. I just say I don't say shoe, I say show, because it messes me up if I say it as it is in the King James. I can't do that Shakespearean English. I can't do it.
Yeah, it is. It is difficult.
So this psalm, the main thing you notice, the first thing you notice of this psalm is that it's a gathering of two groups in an address to two distinct groups. One, the saints, and the second, the wicked. And you have to know what saints are, right? It's not somebody who holds the door open for a stranger. It's not a nice guy. It's not someone who does magic tricks. It's an anointed descendant of Isaac. That's the scriptural definition, that you've been sanctified. You've been sanctified, you've been set apart by God for his purposes. You're a saint. So all of the children of Israel are saints, and that is the context of the Bible. When you're reading about saints, those are the children of Israel.
That is exactly how it's defined in the Old Testament over and over again, that his saints are the children of Israel.
Over and over, even in the New Testament as well, like the very last verse of Revelation, the favor of Prince Joshua is with the saints, truly. And that was the whole message of Revelation, that Joshua is with his saints, Yahweh is not forgotten his promises, and the kingdom is being established. It's the context of the Bible from Genesis to Revelation. And when you get that and you see that the saints are being gathered here, then what's the other group?
That's why this psalm is so important, is because from Genesis to Revelation, it's about two groups.
Yeah.
And what we have in this psalm is it's condensed all that down, and all the elements there in this psalm. There's two groups of people defined as brothers. So that's two different races. We have two covenants here. One people has the covenant, and then God says to the other group, why should you even have my covenant in your mouth? Now, in the Judeo-Christian church and universalist churches, everyone can take the covenant upon themselves. So why would God hold that against them? So you've got two brothers, two covenants, and then we'll see later, that there's two judgments here. If you look past the language in the KJV, there's actually two judgments here. One judgment for the so-called wicked, which is one brother, and another judgment, which is of mercy for the saints. And that's why this psalm is so important.
It's so important. It's a judgment on two nations, and it has to be a judgment on Jacob and Esau, on their descendants. Because as he said, why do you take my covenant in your mouth? You slander your own mother's son. That can only apply to Edom. When we start off with this psalm, we might think that the wicked here could be anybody. It could be anybody, right? It could be any one of those goat nations which are gathered in Matthew 25. But when you really pay attention, you start to see that this is very prophetic for who Esau is today.
It doesn't accord with Judeo-Christian or Universalist theology, because why is there a group that isn't allowed to have the covenant of God in their mouths, and this is another brother? So if we're all brothers and we're all children of God, why would one group have the covenant and one not? So it only makes sense within CI theology. And that's why it establishes CI theology throughout the Bible.
There's three main covenants in the Bible: the Abrahamic covenant, the marriage covenant, which is the old covenant, and then the new covenant. The Abrahamic covenant was made with the descendants of Abraham and Abraham himself, but not through Eleazar and not through Ishmael and not through the sons of Keturah, but through Isaac. In Isaac shall your seed be called. Then that same inheritance was passed down to Jacob, even though he was the younger of Isaac's twins. And Paul says that in Hebrews, where he calls them the joint heirs of the same promise. And Yahweh God confirms it himself when Jacob has the dream of the ladder. And Yahweh says the covenant has now passed on to you. It's not the exact language, but Yahweh confirms it. That's the Abrahamic covenant. The old covenant was made at Sinai with Moses, and that was a marriage covenant. And that was only made with the children of Israel, period. And then the new covenant is only made with the houses of Israel and Judah. And that's in Jeremiah 31. And Paul, he quotes that in Hebrews. So the context of the Bible is that there are these important covenants, distinct covenants made with a man and his offspring. And that's the children of Israel, period. No one else.
Well, it's perfectly legitimate that you went back to Genesis there, to the Noahide covenant and the Adamic covenant, because all those covenants were made with the same race. And so for you not to have any of those covenants, no covenant from God, what is your origin? Do you have an origin with God? Because the Adamic race has a covenant with God.
Right.
Abraham has a covenant with God. So if you're tracing it all the way back to Genesis, as you did, they've got to have, married into corruption, married into a group like Cain, who was of that wicked one. This other brother here, we know the Edomites married into the Canaanites and the mixed people of the land, the cursed tribes, right? So it's perfectly legitimate to go all the way back to Genesis and to say, well, in Genesis there were two brothers too. There was Cain and Abel, and Cain was of that wicked one, and then Abel slayed by his brother. Why did he hate his brother? That's part of it. That's part of the two races here are always at war. The enmity between the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman, as it says in Genesis chapter 3. And you made a reference to Paul, Romans chapter 9, where there's two brothers, and Paul is saying, in Isaac shall your seed be called. So the covenant isn't with all the seed of Abraham, it's with only Isaac got the promise. He was the seed of promise. And that's from Rebecca. Rebecca had two brothers in her womb, two nations, and they struggled against each other.
And when it says here, you slander your own mother's son, that's Rebecca.
Exactly.
That's Rebecca. So, and we know that the people being spoken of here have to be the descendants of Esau today, because the descendants of Esau are found in the modern day Jews. And they pretend to have the covenant, the old covenant. In fact, many Judeo-Christians, they believe that Christians, and they don't really even understand what that term means, but they believe that Christians are under the new covenant and the Jews are still under the old covenant. Even though the old covenant is broken, it is annulled, and that happened when Christ died. That was the staff of beauty in Zechariah 11. It's broken, it's done. And Paul says in Hebrews, fading. It's in the past. They never had it in the first place, but their logic just doesn't work. That old covenant is gone. But the Jews, to this day, still say they're that covenant people. They say that, oh, we're under the old covenant, we're the covenant people. They're the ones who have that covenant in their mouth. It's in their mouth and it doesn't belong there. And they slander their own mother's son because they slander the descendants of Jacob every day, who are found in the modern European peoples. They slander them in their media, in their politics, in everything. This can only apply to Edom. Only Edom takes the covenant in their mouth. And I mean, all the other races hate instruction, but they take the covenant in their mouth and then they write the Talmud and their midrash, where they pretend to have the covenant in their mouth, yet they argue with it. And that's seeing you hate instruction and you cast my words behind you. And we're going to get into all these verses. We're going to go through them one by one.
Yeah, we are. And but first we're just doing an overview. And an important point you made just there was the other races hate instruction. Well, why is that? Because under the new covenant, Yahweh promised to put his law in the hearts of the children of Israel. That's the new covenant, and only the children of Israel are under that covenant. So these other races hate instruction. They can never perceive the law of Yahweh. They don't have it written in their hearts, and they act accordingly. And in Matthew 25, they're judged by that, by their behavior, the way they lived. You look at how they treated the sheep nations. The non-white races have never lived according to Christian values. And just one last thing I wanted to add is, like you're saying, Noble, the new covenant is with the children of Israel. Well, all the covenants are with the same race. So for one people to not have a covenant, why are you even taking my covenant in your mouth? That people is corrupt. That race does not have any covenant with God. And we know the sin of the fallen angels corrupted the earth, and there's the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. So for you to not have any covenant or origin with God whatsoever, you know, you're a satanic race. You're not a godly race. You're not one of the saints. This other brother here has no covenant from God and is assured a different judgment, which we're going to get into, like you said.
And that's a really great point because, yeah, I was focusing on the covenants made with the children of Israel. But like you said, these people being addressed, this wicked group, they have no part in any covenant. Not the promises to Adam and not the promises to Noah. They have no part in any of it, and that must mean they're corrupted. Period. There is no other answer. And you notice that when Yahweh here is addressing the saints, he says that they have made a covenant with him. He says, "Those that have made a covenant with me by sacrifice." Well, the new covenant was confirmed with the blood of Christ. And Paul, he teaches that in Hebrews. So that covenant in the near vision here, that sacrifice in the near vision can be the new covenant, which was made with the saints through the sacrifice of Christ. And it's with the saints. And the saints
Exactly.
are always the children of Israel in the Bible. Always. You can't be sanctified. Technically, the Edomites are sanctified, but Paul teaches, because they were in the loins of Isaac when Isaac was placed upon the altar. But Paul teaches in Romans 9 that they're sanctified for a completely different purpose, and they're sanctified for destruction. They're vessels of wrath. They're furnished for destruction. That is what they have been set apart for. That's what sanctification is. They've been set apart for destruction. But the children of Israel have been set apart for mercy, and they're the vessels of mercy. And in this psalm, you see mercy for the saints and destruction for the wicked. So it's the vessels of mercy, the vessels of wrath. It's Jacob and Esau. It has to
Exactly.
be.
That's why this psalm is so important, is because it's like an overview of the whole Bible and the whole story of the Bible. And you have the two different destinies of two different races of people, two brothers. And that's how it starts from the beginning. Two brothers. One is born of the wicked one, and one makes a sacrifice to God, and his sacrifice is accepted because he's the true heir of Adam. And Cain was the firstborn. Why was his sacrifice rejected? Because he wasn't the true heir of Adam. And so here we have a covenant made with me by sacrifice. God's accepted that sacrifice. These are the people of God. But then you get down to the other group, he's rejected them completely, just like God rejected Cain and just like he's rejected Edom. And we find out that prophecies that haven't yet been fulfilled prophecy that Edom will be destroyed, the vessels of wrath. That's going to be fulfilled. Do you want to go verse by verse now, or did you have something
No,
to
this is
add?
a good time. This is a good time to get started. We've basically summed up the gist of the psalm, so we got the context now. Would you like to read the verses, or do you want me to read?
Oh, well, we could take turns, and if you want to read the first couple of verses, and we'll say what we think about, bit by bit now.
All right, we'll take turns. So I'll start. First of all, I'll just say this is a psalm of Asaph. And Asaph, he wrote many of his psalms during the time of the destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonians and the captivity which followed. And you notice in the Psalms that when you read Psalms of Asaph, they follow that theme, and a lot of them address the ultimate release from captivity, which is pretty interesting because they were going into captivity, Judah. And then he has all these Psalms about a release from captivity. Maybe not fully Psalm 50, maybe not fully. We don't really see that sort of language of a release from captivity here because we're in captivity right now in Mystery Babylon. But what we do see here is eschatology. There is a far vision here, a far fulfillment. This is a very prophetic psalm. And I'm just not surprised to see a psalm like this being written by Asaph. You see that pattern in the Bible. Anyways, with that being said, and that's the context behind when it was written and by whom. A psalm of Asaph. The mighty God, even Yahweh, has spoken and called the earth from the rising of the sun unto the going down thereof. Out of Zion, the perfection of beauty, God has shined. I'll stop there.
Yeah.
In the far vision, if the saints are being gathered and judged, and a goat nation here is being judged, then this is the second coming of Christ, period. This is the second coming. Christ, he said in his Olivet discourse that when he comes, he will gather his elect from the four winds. It was prophesied as early as Deuteronomy, I believe, that the children of Israel would be scattered to the four winds. In Zechariah 2, the children of Israel are described scattered to the four winds. Here, they're being gathered. That happens when Christ returns. So when we open the psalm here and we see the mighty God, even Yahweh, has spoken and called the earth from the rising of the sun unto the going down thereof. Called here is interesting because that's the same Hebrew word which is used in Isaiah often. Israel, my called. Jacob, my called. Etc., etc., etc. And those are the called of the New Testament in Ephesians and elsewhere. So here, there's a return. Out of Zion, the perfection of beauty, God has shined. That's Christ returning to his people, and he's calling the earth from the rising of the sun onto the going down thereof.
As we continue, it'll become more obvious that it is the second return of Christ, and he is coming out of Zion. There are prophecies about Christ coming out of Zion.
Yep.
The thing is, I fully agree that this is the return of Christ. And when he's calling all the earth, well, in Matthew 25, we have the judgment of nations. So I would cross-reference this whole psalm is very cross-referenceable, if I can use that term, to Matthew 25 and to many other CI verses. But Matthew 25 is what's happening here. He's calling all the earth to judgment. And at Matthew 25, it's the judgment of nations. We have sheep and goat nations appearing before God to be judged. Two different peoples here, just like in the Psalm. So Matthew 25, there's goat nations and sheep nations. Here we see there's people of two different covenants and two different judgments.
Right. So it's the gathering of all those nations, not just the children of Israel. And they're from north, south, east, and west. He's gathering them from all corners. Here it just says, from the rising of the sun unto the going down thereof. But the same point remains. And
rising of the sun.
Yeah, that's Malachi 4:2, right?
So would you agree that that's another reference to Christ, the rising of the sun? I mean,
yeah, certainly, certainly, 100%.
We see that all in the prophets. So yeah, so this is the second coming of Christ. I don't know if you have something.
I'll just read Malachi 4:2.
Yeah, good.
But unto you that fear my name shall the Son of Righteousness arise with healing in his wings, and you shall go forth and grow up as calves of the stall. That's the most famous example of the wordplay, which only works in English, where Christ is referred to as the Son. But you see it in many other places. You see it quite a lot in the Psalms. And Paul in Ephesians, I'm going to find it. Ephesians 5:14. I'm going to read from the CNT. For everything being made manifest is light. Therefore he says, awaken you who are sleeping, and rise up from among the dead, and Christ shall shine upon you.
Great. Yeah, that's perfect. Also here, and this is just a side note, I'm seeing this perfection of beauty here. Well, you referenced, was it Zechariah, where the old covenant is broken and it's referred to as beauty? Well, the perfection of beauty,
Yes.
that's the perfection of the old covenant in Christ, because Christ came in Luke 1 to keep the promise to the fathers. So these are all messianic prophecies. All of this is very messianic, and it's the second coming,
This has to be the second coming. And
the
that's
perfection of
really
beauty.
that perfection of beauty. That's a great cross reference. That is great, because when Christ returns, his wife is perfect. His bride is perfect. She has cleansed her garments in the blood of the Lamb. She is spotless to her bridegroom. She is perfect. That is the perfection of beauty. Christ is shining upon her. There's many other examples of that language, but I think Ephesians was good enough. And even the perfection of beauty, right? Even the perfection of beauty. You see that in Psalm 110. Psalm 110 is one of the most quoted Psalms in the New Testament. Christ, he quotes that Psalm in regards to himself in at least 3 out of 4 Gospels. And we all know how it opens. Yahweh said unto my Lord, sit you at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. But the third verse, your people shall be willing in the day of your power. So that's the people are willing to thresh, and they're willing to be obedient to their God in the day of his power. That's second coming. And the beauties of holiness from the womb of the morning, you have the dew of your youth. So the bride is beautiful and the bridegroom. They're both beautiful.
And this is one people, because God has one wife. It was a marriage to Israel and none others. He's not an adulterer. So we'll get to that later in this chapter, because it mentions adultery later in this psalm. But it's all one people. That's the whole theme, is that there's this one people here, the one covenant, the one wife, and the one judgment for these people, the judgment of mercy. So who has God shined upon? You know, Christ said he came only for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. It's all one people that he shined upon and that he's had mercy on. This is the first judgment mentioned here in Psalm 50, and it's in contradiction to the second. You know, his attitude towards these people is totally different to the other brother, which we're getting to. So, Matt, do you want me to read from verse 3 now, a couple of verses?
I'm just going to read one more cross reference for the shining of the face. And this is just going to be Psalm 80. It's another Psalm of Asaph, so that's not surprising. And this is certainly second coming, because when Christ returns, he returns when the widow is crying out to him, save us, save us. We can't save ourselves. We can't deliver ourselves. With that in mind, Psalm 80, just a few verses. Give ear, O shepherd of Israel. That's Christ. You that lead Joseph like a flock, you that dwell between the cherubims, shine forth. Before Ephraim and Benjamin and Manasseh, stir up your strength. Come and save us. Turn us again, O God, and cause your face to shine, and we shall be saved. O Yahweh God of hosts, how long will you be angry against the prayer of your people? You feed them with the bread of tears and give them tears to drink in great measure. You make us a strife unto our neighbors, and our enemies laugh among themselves. Turn us again and our captivity, O God of hosts, and cause your face to shine, and we shall be saved. So in that psalm, Asaph is saying, "Come forth, shine your face, stop hiding your face from Israel, save us." That's the second coming in the far vision. And now in Psalm 50, we're going to see a brief hint of how that salvation comes with the fire. So I think now this is a good time to continue.
Our God shall come and not keep silence. A fire shall devour before him, and it shall be very tempestuous round about him. He shall call to the heavens from above and to the earth, that he may judge his people.
When Christ returns, he comes to make war. That's in Revelation 19. He comes as a warrior Messiah. And that's how he saves us in that day of vengeance. And this fire here doesn't need to be literal because he comes with his saints. Obadiah, Jacob and Joseph are aflame, right? Revelation 20, fire out of heaven consumes Gog and Magog. Well, that's us arising and threshing because the children of Israel are born from above. So we're that fire from heaven that consumes Gog and Magog. And that's the same thing as the saints coming to make war. That's the same thing as Jacob and Joseph being aflame. It's the same thing. So a fire shall devour before him is not just a reference to Christ and how he's unstoppable, but also his people, because they're coming with him. He brings the saints with him. Paul in Hebrews 1, I think it is. And then to the messengers he says, he is making his messengers spirits and his servants a flame of fire. Well, that flame, those servants, because Israel, the children of Israel are the servants of Yahweh God. They become servants of fire at the second coming. So when Paul says he makes his messengers spirits, that's a reference to the apostles and the first coming. And then when he says in his servants, he makes them servants of fire or flames of fire, that's a reference to the second coming. And we're seeing that here in Psalm 50.
And I don't know if you mentioned it because I was looking something up for a sec, but Obadiah. We need to reference Obadiah here because the house of Joseph will be a flame and the house of Esau for stubble. So they'll be burned in the flames. And the thing is that when we're tried by the fire, we're tried by our God. We stand in that flame like silver. We're tried like silver, and we endure the fire, and all the dross is burned away. We also have the parable of the wheat and the tares. The wheat are gathered into his barn, but the tares are all burned away. The good fish and the bad fish. The good fish are gathered into vessels, into his nets, but the bad fish are put into furnaces of fire. So the fire shall devour them. The fire will devour the tares, but the righteous will stand.
A great example of fire being just allegorical is, I think it's Isaiah 11, where it says that the Holy One of Israel will be a flame and they'll devour the thorns and the briars in one day. And I think the far vision of that verse in Isaiah can be cross-referenced right here with Christ because he's the Holy One of Israel. He's the light of Israel. Actually, I think it says the light of Israel shall be a flame. But in the near vision of that verse, it's the Scythians who are descended from the deported Israelites of the Assyrian deportations. It's them having vengeance against the Assyrians, against Nineveh. And they were a part of that confederation of nations, which destroyed Nineveh. And those were people who were doing that. Yet the prophet describes those people as fire. And just how you said that in the Gospels, when John the Baptist says that he's going to gather his wheat into his barn and he's going to burn the chaff with unquenchable fire, John also says that Christ has the winnowing fan in his hand. And Isaiah 41 describes us as that winnowing fan. We're the winnowing fan. Jeremiah 50, I think it is, also says we're that winnowing fan because we're always the battle axe in his hand. We're the battle axe in his hand. We're the threshing instrument. That's Yahweh using his creation to form a weapon, as it is in the wisdom of Solomon. So this is all warrior Messiah. And also, like you said, that fire has another fulfillment because when Christ comes, he tests the works of men. And the fire will scrutinize their works. And that's part of judgment. That is his judgment. And in verse 4 says that he may judge his people. So the fire is also Christ judging the works of men, and whatever remains is whatever is good, whatever endures for the kingdom, good works, the precious stones and whatnot.
That's in 1 Corinthians. But
Yeah.
yeah, I know you know that. But we have to mention it. for the audio. In Matthew 3, where you mentioned a winnowing fan is in his hand, he shall purge his threshing floor, and he shall gather his grain into his storehouse, but the chaff he shall burn with unquenchable fire. I had to read that as it is, because this is the judgment of God. This is Christ judging the world, and the chaff he burns away at his threshing floor, but the grain he gathers into his storehouse, and the winnowing fan is in his hand. It's his judgment. That's exactly what we're seeing here in Psalm 50. It's Christ coming to judge the world. And like we said, Matthew 25, the judgment of nations. This psalm aligns with all of these things. And dual seed line, the two judgments for two different people.
This psalm is just amazing. Just seriously, like it blows me away. And what you just read, verse 3 is the chaff, and verse 4 is the grain. You see?
And all the chaff burns away.
Yeah, he burns the chaff in verse 3, and then he gathers the wheat into his storehouse in verse 4. Because he says that he may judge his people. That has to be Israel. And then he defines his people in the next verse, and I'll read that.
Oh, wait. Can I add one more reference? Because
of course, yeah.
I mentioned the dross and the silver, and that's actually found in Proverbs 25. Take away the dross from the silver, and the smith has material for a vessel. Take away the wicked from the presence of the king, and his throne will be established in righteousness. Whose throne? This is Christ's throne. And we're seeing here that he wants to, this is a Hebrew parallelism. So the first verse and the second verse are both on the same subject, just explained in two different ways. So when he says, take away the dross from the silver, and then take away the wicked from the presence of the king, that's saying that the dross from the silver is the same thing as taking away the wicked out of the kingdom of God. And the wicked is this wicked brother here in this psalm, who doesn't have a covenant with God, no covenant at all with God, and has a different judgment. He's not going to be in the kingdom, this other brother. His judgment is very different, as we will see. So just wanted to add that.
No, that's good. I'm just looking at Psalm 9 here just really quick. Arise, O Yahweh, let not man prevail. Let the nations be judged in your sight. Put them in fear, O Yahweh, that the nations may know themselves to be but men. Selah. Because whenever he comes, he always comes to judge. And you see that in the Psalms, you see it in the prophets, you see it here. The judgment for his people is a judgment of mercy, and the judgment for the wicked is a judgment of condemnation. And you see that in Matthew 25. Like you said, this is basically Matthew 25 as a psalm.
And Proverbs 25, it says that it establishes his kingdom. And that's the same as Matthew 25, because out that judgment is when his kingdom is established. The righteous enter his kingdom at that time, but the wicked go off into eternal punishment. They go to hell. So this judgment being spoken of in Psalm 50 here is the judgment that establishes his kingdom and Christ as king, and the wicked are removed from his kingdom. There's a verse, gather all offenses and remove them from my kingdom. I think that'd be, if I can add that, and then we can read on.
Yeah.
Or you can read on and I'll find the verse, but it's the same as Proverbs 25 here. It's the same judgment where the wicked are removed from his kingdom.
Here, so I'll read ahead while you find that verse. Verse 5, gather my saints. So those are his people in verse 4. Gather my saints together unto me, those that have made a covenant with me by sacrifice. And the heavens shall declare his righteousness, for God is judge himself. Selah. So Christ is God. I don't think anyone has to argue that, but some clowns try, and they fail. Christ is God. Period.
He's also the Son of Man. He's the true heir of the world. He's the Son of Man. And the verse I was looking for is in Matthew 13, and it says, the Son of Man will send his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all causes of sin and all lawbreakers.
Where is that?
Matthew 13.
Right, okay. Right, with the
So,
parable of the wheat and the tares.
yeah. So out this verse, those who don't have the law, all lawbreakers. I mean, that's once again, those who don't have a covenant with God. Their sins are not covered by sacrifice. They have no mercy with God. They're just gathered out of his kingdom, like the tares. The tares don't enter in the kingdom. They're gathered out of his kingdom. The goat nations don't enter his kingdom. They go off into hellfire. So we see that's why this psalm is sort of central to, or can be cross-referenced with all these other things about dual seed line and the judgment of God and the establishment of the kingdom of God.
Well, speaking of establishment of the kingdom, right? Here it says, "And the heavens shall declare his righteousness, for God is judge himself." Those heavens there are the children of Israel, because heaven is often used basically to describe obedient government. It's a government obedient to God. It doesn't actually have to be in the heavens. So you can read that, "and the heavens shall declare his righteousness." That's his saints, his people declaring his righteousness, praising him. And a good cross reference for that would be in Philippians. And Paul writes in Philippians 3:20 to 21, "Of us the government in the heavens exists, from which also we are anxiously expecting a Savior, Prince Yahshua Christ, who will change the form of our body of humiliation, conformed to the body of his honor, in accordance with the operation of which he is able even to subject all things to himself." Of us, the government in the heavens exists. Of us, we're that government. We're that government in the heavens. And here they're praising God, they're declaring his righteousness, because what he does is righteous, and people are going to realize it sooner or later. They will realize it in the end.
Yeah, I mean, it's all here once again, Matthew 25. It's like he is judge himself, so that's Christ is judge, and he's got his saints gathered to him. Those who have, it's not just random people, it's those that have made a covenant with me by sacrifice. So it's the judgment of God that we see all in the parables of Christ, even where he's going to judge the nations and so on.
Right, we see it everywhere. And yep.
Did you read from verse 4 to 6, or did you read 5 and 6?
I read 5 and 6.
So I wanted to add to verse 4, where it says that he may judge his people. Now, our people, like you said, you made a reference to 1 Corinthians, and that he will judge his people and see what, judge their works. And he will try them by fire, and each who has any good works will receive a reward, right? So he is judging his people, but often Yahweh judges his people towards their benefit, in the sense that he's judging in agreement with them against their enemies. So when he judges for his people, he's actually justifying his people. That's what it can mean there, is when he judges his people, he's justifying them in the presence of their enemies. And you see that in multiple places in the Old Testament, that he, like in Isaiah, where he will declare all the seed of Israel justified before him. He will justify the seed of Israel. We don't justify ourselves. Christ, we've made a covenant with him by sacrifice. Christ will justify his people. So this judgment here for his people is often justification.
It often is. And as it is in Matthew 25, the sheep are justified. And Christ, he declares that to the goats, to their face, and then he condemns them. And we're seeing that same pattern here.
We're going to see it.
We're going to see it. We're going to see it. We're about to see it. We even see that pattern in the first 2 verses of Joel 3. "For behold, in those days and in that time, when I shall bring again the captivity of Judah and Jerusalem." Remember when I was reading from Psalm 80, And Asaph was saying, save us, let your face shine upon us, bring us again. It's an end of captivity. Hasn't happened yet. When I shall bring again the captivity of Judah and Jerusalem, I will also gather all nations, all the earth, and will bring them down into the valley of Jehoshaphat, which means Yahweh's judgment, and will plead with them there for my people and for my heritage Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations and parted my land. Again, we're going to see that in Psalm 52, where he's pleading for his people. Why have you slandered my people? Why have you done this to them? He's defending and justifying his people, who are his saints.
That's what it means to plead for his people. He's acting on behalf of his people, and this judgment is for his people.
I love verse 7. If you're ready to read verse 7, I just love it.
Definitely. Hear, O my people, and I will speak. O Israel, and I will testify against thee. I am God, even thy God. I will not reprove thee for thy sacrifices or for thy burnt offerings to have been continually before me.
I just love this idea of Christ gathering his people to himself and just telling them, just testifying, I am God. I am God, even your God. And that really reminds me of Zechariah 14. Zechariah 14 is a second coming prophecy. It has to be. It describes the final destruction of the aliens and the establishment of the kingdom. It says that describes Christ coming and his feet are on the Mount of Olives and he slays all his enemies. He's a warrior Messiah. And Yahweh shall be king over all the earth. Well, that happens when Christ returns. Hasn't happened yet. Even though he's king now, we haven't acknowledged his reign. And he's not king over the whole earth right now. The earth right now is in the power of the evil one. And Yahweh shall be king over all the earth. In that day shall there be one Yahweh, and his name one. That is a prophecy of the day when Trinity doctrine just dies at the door, and his name is one, not three, not two, not four, not five, but one. That is the day when Yahweh is king over all the earth, that people, all men, from the least onto the greatest, they understand completely well that Yahshua Christ is Yahweh God in the flesh. And then here in Psalm 50, he just says it straight. I am God, even your God.
I just love that part where it says, even thy God. Like, he's not the God of all the peoples of the earth or any of this nonsense. He's thy God. And whenever I see that, I always think of Zechariah 13, which says, they shall call on my name. Who's they? You know, obviously it's Israel. And I will hear them. Oh, just like in this psalm here, he will hear them. I will say, it is my people, and they shall say, Yahweh is my God.
No, that's a lot. And that's just before, not just before, but only a few verses before what I just read. So it's following the same context.
Another one I love is Psalm 33. Blessed is the nation whose God is Yahweh. He's not the God of all, not all nations are blessed, right?
No.
Blessed is the nation whose God is Yahweh. Well, whose God is Yahweh? Well, in this psalm here, there's two groups. And here at verse 7, it says, I am God, even thy God. He adds that there. He adds that there. This is the nation whose God is Yahweh. Blessed is the nation whose God is Yahweh. Why? Because they're receiving mercy here in this psalm.
He is the God of the wheat who are being gathered into the barn. He's the God of these saints, his people, the heavens. They're his God, but he's not the God of the wicked who are about to be addressed. And I love it too that it says that every word in the Bible counts. It's always there to make a point, to compound with something else. And there we're seeing that the value of those two extra words, because even is in italics, and so is to have been. To have been is in italics. And this verse, I didn't have time to look at the Hebrew, but this verse 8, it's a bit different if you look at several translations. In the ESV, English Standard, they have it as Not for your sacrifices do I rebuke you. Your burnt offerings are continually before me. And it's quite the same in the American Standard. That's interesting because it really seems contradictory. Because in verse 8, he's saying, I will not reprove you for your sacrifices. I'm not going to rebuke you for those. But then in verse 9, he starts rebuking them and saying, I don't want them. So what's going on there? Well, I think it's quite clear. Because in verses 9 to around 13, he defines those sacrifices as sacrifices of bulls and goats. Basically, the sort of sacrifices of the Levitical priesthood, which have been done away with. So in verse 5, where it says, gather my saints together unto me, those that have made a covenant with me by sacrifice. We already talked about the near vision. And the near vision is the passion of the Christ. I think I would interpret the far vision as being the burnt offering for the Feast of Tabernacles. And that might sound a bit ambiguous to some people or obscure, like what? The the burnt offering for the Feast of Tabernacles? Well, those feasts are a shadow of heavenly things, and they all pointed the way to Christ. And probably the best book to read to see that is Hebrews, where Paul, he explains how the Day of Atonement and the sacrifice being slain outside the camp, it pointed to Christ. This pointed, this was all a type. This is a shadow, this is a shadow, this is a type. All those feasts are types. And the transcendental ultimate fulfillment for a lot of those feasts has been fulfilled. Passover, unleavened bread, first fruits, Pentecost, that was all fulfilled with the first coming. Those are spring feasts, planting feasts, early rain feasts in the spring season of the year. Then there's a dry period between the spring and the autumn and the fall harvest feast. There's a dry period, and we're in that dry period right now, but we're very close to the harvest. That harvest is the harvest of the wheat and the tares. There are 3 harvest feasts: trumpets, atonement, and tabernacles. Trumpets, well, when Christ comes, the chief messenger blows the trumpet, gathers the people. Atonement, the new covenant is consummated upon the second coming of the Christ. Even though the new covenant was given to Israel when Christ died upon the cross, it isn't consummated yet. It isn't fully fulfilled because the new covenant also includes marriage, and we have the marriage invitation, but we're not actually married yet. Christ will gather us and marry us when he returns. We just have the invitation right now. So that atonement would be when the bride is gathered to the bridegroom. She's atoned fully for all her sins. Death is thrown into the lake of fire, and we live in the kingdom with Christ.
The marriage supper hasn't come yet.
The marriage supper hasn't come yet. And tabernacle is really the marriage supper because that's Christ coming to tabernacle with his people. But at the time when that feast comes, there has to be a burnt offering. And that burnt offering has to be Gog and Magog. It's said throughout the prophets that Gog and Magog, which is easily fulfilled through immigration, though there can be a militant fulfillment in the future, they're all coming here to die. And they're described in the prophets as a sacrifice to God. So I'm just going to read a few verses that really show that. Zephaniah 1:7-8. Hold your peace at the presence of the Lord God, for the day of Yahweh is at hand, the day of his vengeance. For Yahweh has prepared a sacrifice. He has bid his guests. Blessed are those invited to the wedding supper of the Lamb. The wedding supper of the Lamb is the sacrifice of God's enemies. You see that in Revelation 19. It's the great supper, all those corpses, which the birds and the beasts feed upon, the corpses of kings, small men and great men. They threaten the nations. Yeah.
It's the final feast. If we go back to verse 5 here, it says, those that have made a covenant with me by sacrifice. Well, if this has to be the bride.
Yep.
And
Because
we're
they
waiting,
made
we're
it with
awaiting
him.
that final feast, which you're talking about now, which is the Feast of Tabernacles. And out that feast, there is a sacrifice made. So that's what you're referencing.
That's what I'm referencing. And that sacrifice is the destruction of his enemies.
It's like,
And you see that in Revelation, you see that in Zephaniah, you see it in Ezekiel.
And you see it here. I mean, we see
here.
the destruction of his enemies here. We see a judgment of God and those who have a covenant with him by sacrifice, and those who do not. So
Exactly. And that's what Paul described to the Corinthians as the fragrance of death unto death. Because in 2 Corinthians, Paul, he's talking about how many of the Corinthians and other early Christians are dying and they're being martyred. It's a time of great violence. And he says that when the Christians die, they're a fragrance of life unto life. Christ, he said that when you die, you enter into life. So you're living the Christian life. You are alive. You're not twice dead. You're living that life, and when you die, it's a fragrance of life into life. When a Israelite dies, he enters into life, and that's a fragrance, a sweet fragrance unto Yahweh God, because precious in his eyes are the blood of his saints. But then Paul says, speaking of another group, these outsiders who scoff at the gospel, and to them it's a symbol of destruction. And he says other things that I can't remember, but the context is clear in the epistle. He says that when they die, they're a fragrance of death unto death. And that's because they're twice dead. And it's a fragrance of sweet savor unto Yahweh. That's also a fragrance of sweet savor. And when Paul is describing a fragrance for both us and them, those are both sacrifices, right? That's a Christian sacrifice, laying down your life for your brethren, laying down your life for your God. And then for them, that's a sacrifice that is gathered to the threshing floor. That's the chaff being thrown into the fire. And that is also a sweet savor unto Yahweh God. And you see that language in Ezekiel with the destruction of Gog and Magog. So in the far vision here, this sacrifice is the destruction of Gog and Magog. So Yahweh says in verse 8, he's not going to reprove the children of Israel for preparing that sacrifice for him. He's not going to reprove them for it. He's happy about it. But he doesn't want any sacrifices of bulls and goats. And we're going to be seeing that as we continue.
Well, I think it'd be good if I read these verses about sacrifice and then gave a conclusion to. We can conclude this part just on the sacrifices. So verse 9, well, I'll start at verse 8 again. I will not reprove thee for thy sacrifices or thy burnt offerings to have been continually before me. I will take no bullock out of thy house, nor he goats out of thy folds. For every beast of the forest is mine, and the cattle upon 1,000 hills. I know all the fowls of the mountains, and the wild beasts of the field are mine. If I were hungry, I would not tell thee, for the world is mine and the fullness thereof. Will I eat the flesh of bulls, or drink the blood of goats? Offer unto God thanksgiving, and pay thy vows unto the Most High. So here that word there, reprove, can mean justify. And I'm not an expert on Hebrew, but my conclusion here is when we put this in contrast with the other group, which takes the covenant of God in their mouths, well, they pretend, like you were saying, to still have this old covenant here. We're being told here that he's not interested in that old covenant anymore. They won't be justified under this old covenant. They're going to be justified by a different covenant, which is the new covenant under Christ. So we're seeing, like, these people never had a legitimate claim to any covenant, but even if we pretend that they're still living the old covenant, well, they're not going to be justified by that either, because here we see that Yahweh he doesn't want a bullock out of thy house, nor he goats out of thy folds, Will I eat the flesh of bulls or drink the blood of goats? Instead, offer unto God thanksgiving and pay thy vows unto the Most High. So they're justified under the new covenant, which is the perfection of beauty, as it says in verse 2. So even if the Jews pretend that they've got the old covenant, they're not going to be justified by it. The only justification for Israel is in Christ with the perfection of beauty.
Hebrews 10:4. For it is impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away errors. The same bulls and goats in Psalm 50. On which account, coming into the society, he says, sacrifice and offering you have not desired, but you have prepared a body for me. And that's the body of Christ. Burnt offering also for errors you have not been pleased with. And then I said, behold, I come. In a chapter of a book it is written concerning me, that I will do, O Yahweh, your will. Saying above, sacrifices and offerings, and burnt offerings also for errors you have not desired, nor have you been pleased with, which are offered in accordance with the law. Then he said, behold, I will come that I will do your will. He takes away the first, that he may establish the second, in which will we are sanctified through the offering of the body of Yahshua Christ, that sacrifice here in Psalm 50, once and for all. There in Hebrews, Paul is pretty much saying exactly what we read here in Psalm 50, that Yahweh is not satisfied with bulls and goats, but he's satisfied with the sacrifice which established this covenant in Psalm 50, which must be the second covenant here that Paul is speaking of, the new covenant, which sanctifies the children of Israel.
And glorifies God. I mean,
Yeah,
that's the whole point, is it's not for us only, it's to glorify God. When we see that he's brought us through all these things, it will glorify himself. And when he saves Israel, that glorifies Yahweh. And that's the last verse of the first part here, addressed to the children of Israel. This first judgment here, I think we should conclude it if you want to read verse 15.
And call upon me in the day of trouble. I will deliver you, and you shall glorify me.
Yep. So apart from the flesh of bulls and goats, he will deliver them, and he will be glorified. Call upon me in the day of trouble. Why are they in trouble? We'll find out in the next verse. I mean, we find out that the people of Israel, the children of Israel, have been slandered by their brother. So they're in trouble here. We're in trouble. We're just as Cain and Abel. Abel was in trouble when Cain slew him. Jacob was threatened by Esau, and that's in Wisdom 10. I'm actually going to bring that up now. In Wisdom 10, we find that Jacob had to flee from his brother. So we're in trouble, but God will deliver us. He will, and in Luke 1, we will be delivered from the hands of our enemies. So I'm going to get those two verses.
We're in the time of Jacob's trouble. We're in the time of Jacob's trouble right now. And the time of Jacob's trouble, that's when Esau raises his sword against his brother Jacob. Isaac, when prophesying, Isaac said to Esau, you will serve your brother, you will be under his yoke, I'm paraphrasing, and at the time of the end, you will break his bonds, and you will lift up your sword against your brother. Well, that's okay. So the Edomites are often described as dragons in the Bible, right? Malachi 1, Yahweh gave the heritage of Esau to dragons of the wilderness. Herod is called a dragon in Revelation 12. He's described that way. So, and they're the beast as well because they give power to the beast. Well, they're chained up for 1,000 years in Revelation, and that's the Jews in their ghettos, and they're the Edomites. And then when those 1,000 years are finished, they crawl out of the pit, and that was around the time of the French Revolution. And that's when the time of Jacob's trouble began. When
Yeah.
Esau crawled out of the pit, Jacob's trouble began because Esau gained ultimate control over the society. And that's Revelation 17:17, that the kingdom is given over to the beast for a time. So that's the time of Jacob's trouble. Jacob is in trouble because of Esau, and Esau is the other group in this psalm. Esau is that group. So when it says here, call upon me in the day of trouble, it's Jacob's trouble because the other group he's about to address, Esau, is causing him that trouble.
And in Wisdom 10, it has, when the righteous fled from his brother's wrath, she guided him in right paths, showed him the kingdom of God, and gave him knowledge of holy things, made him rich in his travels, and multiplied the fruit of his labors. So that could easily be referenced, here where we have the two brothers and one's in trouble because of the wrath of his brother, but showed him the kingdom of God. That's what's happening here, is one brother at Matthew 25 enters into the kingdom of God. And we know from John 3 that just to see the kingdom of God, you have to be born from above. So, not everyone's born from above. Adam has an origin with God. He was born from above. But Cain was born of that wicked one. So, it's Matthew 25. The righteous enter the kingdom of God. That's a judgment there. And he's been persecuted by the goat nations. How did the goat nations treat the sheep nations? Well, we find out that they didn't visit him in prison. Christ is judging them for how he treated his sheep and how they would treat him. And they fed on his holy mountain in Obadiah 1:18. So, and then they're going to be judged for that, and they will be as though they were not.
The people, the saints here, are being persecuted. They're being persecuted by this wicked group, which has to be Esau.
Just
Yeah.
as Esau persecuted Jacob. That's what I'm trying to say. So
that was all a type for the future. That's why the historical books of the Bible are so interesting, because Joshua, Genesis, and Judges, you see all these types for the future and the things men did, and they had no idea that Yahweh was weaving this great story through the events of their lives. So yeah, just how Esau persecuted Jacob in the most literal sense and tried to kill him, and Yahweh delivered him. Well, in Luke 18, this is unique to Luke. Christ, he gives a parable of his second coming, and he speaks of a widow. Well, the children of Israel weren't a widow until Christ died, and they're calling out for help because they're being persecuted from an enemy. Luke 18:2 saying, there is a certain judge in some city who feared not Yahweh and respected not man. And there was a widow in that city, and she began saying to him, exact vengeance for me from my opponent, Esau. And if we want to cross-reference this to Psalm 50. Yet for a time he desired it not, but afterwards he said to himself, even if I do not fear Yahweh, nor do I respect man, indeed on account of this widow causing me trouble, I shall avenge her, lest in result of her coming she wears me out. Then said the prince, hear what the unrighteous judge says. Now would Yahweh not at all bring about vengeance for his elect, those who are crying out to him day and night, and have forbearance with them? I say to you that he shall bring about vengeance for them with haste, his second coming. But coming then shall the Son of Man find faith upon the earth. So they're crying out to him day and night. They're crying out to him day and night, and he comes and he delivers them with haste.
just as it says out verse Psalm 50 here, you've got the exact same thing with him delivering them from his enemies. I'm actually at Luke here, so I can't read it right now, but I want to add Luke to the conversation because when we call to him, he will perform the mercy promised to the fathers, that we should be saved from our enemies and from the hand of all who hate us. Oh, okay. We have enemies then who aren't part of this covenant, to perform the mercy promised to our fathers and to remember his holy covenant So it's Luke 1, which cross-references very easily to Psalm 50 here.
I can't remember if that's Miriam or Zechariah speaking.
It's Zechariah.
So he says, to perform the mercy you promised to Abraham. That's the first coming. But to deliver us from all of our enemies hasn't been fulfilled yet. And we see that fulfillment in this psalm and many
I
others.
will deliver thee. I will deliver
deliver
thee, and thou shalt glorify me. Call upon me in the day of trouble. So we're in trouble here, and now we get to what God turns to another people and addresses the wicked.
Yeah, you want to read that?
Okay. But unto the wicked God saith, what hast thou to do to declare my statutes, or that thou shouldest take my covenant in thy mouth, seeing thou hatest instruction and castest my words behind thee?
Well, what do we know about Jews and what do Jews do today, every day? Wow. They declare
Well,
the statutes all the time as if they're the
Yeah.
covenant people. And they say that they're the covenant people.
while they're breaking the statutes all the time. I mean, they don't have the new covenant, so they don't have the law of God written in their hearts. They hatest instruction, so they're pretending they have the statute. It's important here that it says, declare my statutes and the covenant. So we've got the law and the covenant. In the previous, when he was addressing the previous people, it was clear that they had the covenant and they were being judged according to the law and justified. But these people here, they're mentioning the law and the covenant, and they're not justified. They apparently hate instruction, so they don't have the law of God written in their hearts, and they've casted his words far behind them. Obviously, they've gone into race mixing. Yahweh's word is way, way behind them. They can't even come back to Yahweh's word or to his law. There's no path for them back to him and his law because his words are far behind them. They've gone off into all kinds of sin, and we'll find out they've even gone off into fornication, race mixing. They're a corrupted people. They have no covenant. They shouldn't even take the covenant of God in their mouth.
If I could have a verse in the Bible to cross-reference to the Talmud and the Midrash, it would be Psalm 50:17 or 50:16 to 17.
That's what it is, yeah, circumvention of his law.
Yep.
And that's how they've casted his words behind him one way. I mean, Christ spoke about the tradition of the elders.
Yep. And that's the near vision here, because the near vision is the passion of the Christ. And we were talking about that. So the near vision for these verses has to be Christ in his dialogues with the Pharisees and the scribes and the Sadducees. It's his dialogue with his opponents.
Especially the Sadducees. And, you look at John 8 and you've got people there born of fornication who cannot understand his word. And Christ asked them, for what reason can you not perceive my speech? And here we have, seeing thou hatest instruction and casteth my words behind thee. We find out in John 8 that they're not doing the works of Abraham. Why is that? Why can't they perceive his speech? Because they were born of fornication. If Christ even says, if you were of God, you would love me. So John 8 is another one of our favorite verses, and it cross-references very easily to Psalm 50, which is why Psalm 50 should be, esteemed alongside John 8. I'm going to go to John 8.
No, go right ahead. We were saying this is Matthew 25 in a psalm. This is John 8 in a psalm. This is all the pillar passages which really give us insight to our understanding of doctrine, and it's true Christian doctrine. It's all of those understandings put into one psalm. This is essential for an identity Christian to have in their toolkit.
Well, I mean, there's other viable cross-references from John 8 to Psalm 50 here, and we'll see that in the next few verses. But here, Jesus said unto them, if God were your father, there's an if there. If God were your father, ye would love me, for I proceeded forth and came from God, neither came I of myself, but he sent me. Why do ye not understand my speech? Even because ye cannot hear my word. Now we know at the beginning of John that Christ is the word of God. He is the law of God. And then here in Psalm 50, they've cast the word of God far behind them. They have no part with him.
You see that in the seven woes of the Pharisees. All these things the Pharisees were doing in secret. And yeah, and like you pointed out earlier, primarily the Sadducees, because the Sadducees were essentially all Edomites. The Pharisees, it was a mixed bag, it was a portion, it was a party, it was a political party, not a race. So there were true Israelites among the Pharisees, such as Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea. But as for Christ addressing his opponents with those seven woes, he's condemning them for casting the law behind their backs and for being hypocrites and hating instruction. The Proverbs, right? Proverbs says that when a righteous man is rebuked, he is happy about it. Like he thanks the man rebuking him. Thank you for rebuking me. Now I'm going to improve. Praise Yahweh. Thank you. But a fool despises instruction. Well, they never thanked Christ for rebuking them. They were never like, oh, you know what? Thank you so much. Like I need to improve on that. I'm going to go and repent. They hated instruction. They hated being reproved. They hated it. They had no regard for his law, and they still don't today.
And the thing is that here he's saying, what hast thou to do to declare my statutes, or that thou shouldest take my covenant in thy mouth? So he doesn't even want them to repent. He doesn't want, and if you consider that Christ is the personification of the law of God, he doesn't want them being Christians, because here he says, what hast thou to do to declare my statutes? He doesn't want you declaring yourself a Christian. He hasn't written the law of God in your heart if you're one of these people, of this group. And he doesn't want you declaring the new covenant or any covenant of his in your mouth. You have no part with him whatsoever. And his words are far behind you. He's far, he's far from you. Christ is. And that's what we see in John 8.
Paul, he said that the law is spiritual. So the law was only given to Israel, but putting that aside, even forgetting about that for a moment, if someone who isn't of Israel tries to follow the law and conform himself to it, he's just going to be a dog returning to his own vomit, because the law is spiritual. And that means you have to have the spirit to follow it, because it comes from God. When an Adamic man has the Spirit of God in him, he can look at the law, see that it's good, understand it, and conform himself to it, because that's a fruit of the Spirit. You have to have the Spirit. You have to have that dual nature. As Adamic men, we can choose. We can make a decision. Do we choose to follow the flesh or the Spirit? The other races don't have that decision. They have one option. I follow the flesh, and that's because they don't have the Spirit, which was imparted onto Adam and which is genetically passed on to his descendants, as Paul teaches in 1 Corinthians 15. So even though the law is only given to Israel, when imposters like these try to pretend they have that law, they can't keep up the facade. They can't do it. And that's why Yahweh here, or Christ, he's calling them out for it. He always does that, right? When he's condemning an alien, he always points out how they have no good fruits. A bad tree, a bad family tree, cannot produce good fruits. He challenged Cain to do well. John the Baptist, he challenged the offspring of vipers to do well. And here, for these people who were pretending for 2,000 years now, and more than that, to have the covenant, he's calling them out for it by saying, if you had the covenant, why can't you follow it? Why can't
That's
you do
an excellent point. Yeah. Because in John 8, we find that the reason they can't do the works of Abraham is because they were born of fornication. And like you were saying, they don't have the Spirit of God. So in John 3, we find that only those who are born from above will see the kingdom of heaven. And later in that same chapter, we have the wind blows wherever it pleases. You hear it sound, but you cannot tell where it comes from or where it's going. So it is with everyone born of the Spirit. So it's not within the realm of men to decide whether they're born of the Spirit or not. That's within the realm of God. We
You're born
can't
that
make
way.
someone a Christian. We can't instill the Spirit of God into a broken vessel. And if you're not born of God, you're not going to do the works of Abraham.
You do the works of your father. So if your father's a devil, you're going to act like one because you're a devil too. You're a viper too. Offspring of vipers, their parents were vipers. And if the Jews were to truly the covenant people, as they say, they would love his law, they would uphold it. The Talmud wouldn't exist. The Midrash wouldn't exist. The Kabbalah wouldn't exist. None of that would exist. All that would exist to them would be the Bible. And they would love it, they would cherish it, and they would conform themselves to it, and they would be a light unto the world. People would be like, look at these Jews and the great nations that God blesses them with because of their obedience to him. Look at how pious they are and how much they love his law and cherish it. You don't see that with them. They argue with it, and their sense of righteousness comes from pretense. But God has no regard for pretense. You see that in the Gospels, you see that in the prophets. He cares about obedience, he cares about brotherly love. Two things which these Edomites lack because they don't have brotherly love. They slander their own mother's son, and they hate his law. They have bad fruits. They don't care to do good. They don't want to. They'll do everything they can to get out of it.
Well, we're getting to the slander and that, but I
Yep.
think it's just an excellent point to differentiate between those who are born of the Spirit or don't have the Spirit and what their works are, and those who are born of the Spirit, like a bad tree has bad fruit, a good tree has good fruit. That's genetic.
Yep.
And here we see that. Why would God not even want a people to have? Doesn't God want everyone to follow his law? Doesn't God want everyone? You know, the thing is that God cares about his creation and what he created, and he wants creation to persist and endure the way he created it. And that's why his law is there in the first place, is to preserve his creation the way he wanted it to be. So if he doesn't want you having his covenant in their mouth, they're not part of his creation. He doesn't want them corrupting his creation just as the fallen angels did. He doesn't want them being part of him, having any part with him. And it's to do with origin. It's not to do with they're bad people who were mean to me or my feelings or hurt my feelings or anything like that. It's not according to man. It's according here to the law and covenant of God. It's not that's why that's their behavior. That's why they hate instruction. That's how they've cast his words behind them, is because they have no part with him because of their origin, because their existence is a sin itself. They can't have a covenant with him.
No, they can't. They can't. He's not going to make a covenant with a plant he didn't plant. He's not going to do that. He's not going to accept an abomination of his creation. From the very beginning of this psalm, it was racial when he gathered his saints. That was your first hint that it was racial. And it's racial throughout. That was a racial group. That's why we knew from the beginning that this had to be a racial group with the wicked. It just didn't become clear to us right away, or clear to the reader right away, until you get later and you're like, oh wait, what wicked nation is this? Oh, it's Edom. It's not just any wicked nation, like any goat nation. It's Edom in specific. But if you're contrasting two groups and the second group is contrasted to a racial group, which is the first, then the second also has to be a racial group. It just has to be that way. It didn't say at the beginning that God is going to gather all believers onto himself from all the winds, or from the north, from the east to the west. He didn't say
It's
that.
definitely not believers. It's not believers. It's
No.
defined as two brothers, and that's a racial construct. Belief isn't two brothers. That's individualistic. Any man can believe anything. And maybe we should read those verses now, but the construct is two brothers, and that, of course, is racial. They're two patriarchs of two different races.
Yep.
Do you want me to read that now? Those
Yeah, go
maybe
ahead.
these three verses. I mean,
They pretty
so
much go
here we
together.
we have a continuation of their sins, and we see that it is most certainly racial. And we had the clue, like you said, in the first verses where we have the saints. Well, now we have another clue that this is definitely racial. And so it says from verse 18, when thou sawest a thief, then thou consentest with him, and hast been a partaker with adulterers. Thou givest thy mouth to evil, and thy tongue frameth deceit. Thou sittest and speakest against thy brother. Thou slanderest thine own mother's son. And this, just before you say anything, like this really brings me back to John 8. These three verses.
And one of the reasons why it brings us back is because the language here is so strong. The language is so severe. You can see it coming off the page that Yahweh is very angry with this people. As it says in Malachi 1, Esau I hated. He hates these people. And you can see it coming off the page. What right do you have, seeing that you hate instruction, you consent with thieves, you give your mouth to evil, you slander your own mother's son? And as we said earlier, that has to be Rebecca. That is Rebecca. That
And in
mother
John
is
8,
Rebecca.
it has to be Esau, because we see at John 8:39 that they are children of Abraham,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't do the works of Abraham. That's Esau. So they replied and said to him, our father is Abraham. Yahshua says to them, if you are children of Abraham, you would have done the works of Abraham. But now you seek to kill me, a man who has spoken to you the truth, which I have heard from Yahweh. This Abraham has not done. You do the works of your father. Then they said to him, we were not born of fornication. We have one father, Yahweh. So I don't know if you have anything to say, but so far I'm seeing this born of fornication, and in Psalm 50 we have partakers with adulterers. And to adulterate something in English is to mix it, to adulterate, to corrupt it. So if you're a partaker with adulterers, that suggests to me that you're of a mixed race. You were born of fornication.
That's a good interpretation. That's spot on. They're the authors of it as well. They partake with it and they promote it. They're the authors of that sin. They promote it in society.
And here in Psalm 50, we see their lips frameth deceit. I only can see one verse at a time on Esau, but from memory, it's thou tongue frameth deceit, or lips frameth deceit. Well, in here, in John 8, as we continue, it says, if Yahweh was Yahshua said to them, if Yahweh was your father, you would have loved me, for I have come of Yahweh and am here. I have not come by myself, but he has sent me. For what reason do you not perceive my speech? Because you are not able to hear my word. You are the sons of a father, the false accuser, and you wish to do the desires of your father. He was a murderer from the beginning. That's a brother there. That's Cain. That's one of the evil brothers. Okay. He was a murderer from the beginning and did not stand in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaks a lie, he speaks of his own devices, because he is a liar and the father of it.
You give your mouth to evil, your tongue frames deceit. You're liars. Your father was a liar. And
No
then
truth in them.
no truth in them. And in verse 20, you see the false accuser. You see the diablos. And remember, Christ and John, he called Judas a false accuser. You're a false accuser. You're a devil. And we see that here. You slander your own mother's son. That's false accusation. That's a diablos.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So there's no truth in them. Why do they not perceive his speech? His word has no place in them. Because my
Speaking
word
of,
hath no place in you. I speak that which I've seen with my father. So he's speaking the law and the covenants of God, and it's not for them. That's why they can't. In John 8, it explains why they've rejected his word and cast it far behind him. The words of Christ. These people who Christ is speaking to, who are definitely of Esau, born of fornication, right, and Abraham as a father, they cannot receive Christ. They've rejected. Well, and he's rejected them too. I mean, first of all, Christ has rejected them because in Psalm 50 it says, "Don't even take my covenant in your mouth." So it begins with God. God didn't choose them. He doesn't want them. He doesn't want them to repent. He knows they can't repent. Their works, they do the works of their father, the devil. Why? Because they were born of fornication and are partakers in adultery.
Think of how many times in the Gospels the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes and the elders, they all said, "We follow the law of Moses. We follow Moses. We follow Moses." That's them taking the covenant in their mouth. But Christ said to them, if you followed Moses, if you believed in Moses, you would have believed in me because Moses wrote about me. They always said, "Oh, we follow Moses." They always said it, but they never did. They were wicked men. And that was them hating instruction and casting it behind them. But we see this dialogue, it's so prevalent in the Gospels and especially in John 8. Especially in John 8. But you see it all throughout their hypocrisy.
Yeah, they can't even receive the words of God. He who is from of Yahweh hears the words of Yahweh. For this reason you do not hear, because you are not from of Yahweh. So they're not from God. And that's what we see here in Psalm 50. They're born of adultery. That he doesn't even want them to have the covenant in their mouths. They have no part with God whatsoever. And they're going to have a different judgment. But another cross reference we might have forgot is Malachi 2.
Right, we all have one father, even Yahweh. And then Yahweh says, "No, Judah has married the daughter of a strange god." Is that what you're referring to?
Have we not all one Father? So that's the question here.
Yeah.
Hath not one God created us? Surely. I mean, that's what everyone believes. Why do we deal treacherously every man against his brother? By profaning the covenant of our fathers. So here in Psalm 50, every man's dealing treacherously against his brother. Well, we've got him slandering his brother. So there's two brothers here in Malachi 2 as well, just like there's two brothers in Psalm 50, by profaning the covenant of our fathers. Well, to profane the covenant of your father, it would be in the mouth of a people who shouldn't have it in their mouths, just like in Psalm 50. And why is that? Why is that? Judah hath dealt treacherously, and an abomination is committed in Israel and in Jerusalem, for Judah hath profaned the holiness of Yahweh, which he loved, and hath married the daughter of a strange god. That's fornication. That's partakers with adultery.
Yep.
Because how could they be the daughter of a strange god if everyone's born of God? But the question Malachi says, have we not all one father? And the answer is no, we don't, because Judah hath married the daughter of a strange god, and that's profaned the covenant of the fathers. That's why they have no part with God. They have no covenant with God, just as in Psalm 50. I mean, it's all there, bro.
It's just an incredible song. Like it's just so hard to sort of wrap your head around it. How much this psalm says in 23 verses. In 23 verses, it's summarizing all these major pillar points. And going back to the slander just for a moment, in the prophets, when the captivity is ended, there's many prophets that say that in that day Yahweh will take away the reproach of Jacob away from the earth. Where's this reproach of Jacob coming from? It's coming from his brother. His brother is slandering him, and at the time of the second coming, there is a reproach of Jacob. That is all the lies which the Jews pass every day, whether it be this or that, all the things they accuse of us of doing, which we never did, yet they do themselves. So that slander is more prevalent today, I think, than ever. And that is the reproach of Jacob, which God has promised to take away. He will take that reproach away. And we even see basically this psalm is the taking away of that reproach. That's one of the themes here.
Yeah, that's the end. That's the conclusion. And
That's
the
the
thing is
conclusion.
that at Malachi 2, it's the priesthood who have been taking this like the covenant has been profaned, because there are people among that priesthood at the time of Malachi who aren't Levites. They're
And the
of the
Levites,
wrong.
Sorry, but the Levites would be the ones who would declare the statutes.
Yeah.
So they're not truly of Levi. So what right do you have to declare my statutes?
It's all racial. It's all racial, just as in
Yeah.
John 8. That's why this psalm is so important. It's because it's racial, it's two covenants, it's two judgments, and it's two brothers. And it's the same in Malachi too. It's the same in John 8. It's the same from Genesis, where you have two brothers, one born of corruption and one born the seed of the woman, seed of the serpent. And then to Matthew 25, as we said, with the judgment of the two nations, one has a covenant with God and enters into the kingdom, and one goes to hell. So that's what, I mean, it's all here.
It's all here. It's all here. With Cain, with Cain, it wasn't really a competition between him and Abel over a covenant, but it was a competition over a priesthood, the Melchizedek priesthood. And what right did Cain have to have that priesthood? It's the same thing. What right do you have? He had no right, even though he was the eldest. He had no right. He wasn't eligible.
The battle for the priesthood. I mean, and that's reflected in the battle of the priesthood in Malachi 2, because you have the covenant being profaned because there's priests who shouldn't be there. So it's the battle of the priesthood again. So you can say that, from Genesis to Revelation, there's a battle between two brothers, a good seed and a bad seed, which is reflected in Psalm 50. But you could also say that it's a battle between two priesthoods, one which is legitimate, the true heir, and one which is not. And so Cain was vying, as you're saying, as you're saying, Noble, like Cain made an offering, and that offering was rejected. Why? Because he wasn't a legitimate priest. Just as in Malachi, the same thing happens. There are sacrifices being made to God that he is rejecting because they're not a legitimate priesthood. And here today we have a people who pretend to be the people of God and pretending to still hold to those old sacrifices, and God's not going to accept them. That's what we see in Psalm 50 here, that the first group is being justified apart from sacrifice, and then the second group is told, why are you even taking that covenant in thy mouth? Why are you even taking that law in thy mouth? And so I think that's an excellent point you made about the Levites being the teachers of the law.
And that was really beginning in Malachi's time, and then it was still happening in Christ's time. But in the time of Christ, the Levites had at that time been reduced to, many of them, to an impoverished state, and many of them had to take other vacations, because now this same group basically just replaced the Levitical priesthood with their own parties and their own hypocrisy.
The Sadducees and so on.
Yeah, and something we have to remember is that you can't add yourself to a covenant. Paul, he taught that very clearly in Galatians chapter 3, that you can't add yourself to a covenant which is already validated. Yahweh, he sets the terms of his covenants. You can't scribble your name in. You can't try to defraud God. And you can't also retract yourself from a covenant either. You can't do that either. When Israel failed under the old covenant, they were divorced. But that divorce did not break the old covenant. It did not fully void it. It broke it in the sense that they could no longer fulfill their obligations under that covenant, because they no longer had the ephod, the teraphim, and all the instruments of civic life in Israel, which they would require to fulfill their obligations under the old covenant. They didn't have it anymore. But the covenant still remained, because a marriage covenant can only be broken when one of the spouses dies. Otherwise, so when you divorce your wife, that's why Christ says in the Gospels, when you divorce your wife and marry another, you commit adultery, because your divorce to your wife did not end your marriage covenant with her. And the same was true for Yahweh and Israel. So they were still under the old covenant in their dispersions. That covenant ended when one of the parties of the marriage died, and that was Yahweh on the cross. The covenant ended.
Exactly.
But the new covenant, which we're in now and which is going to be consummated very soon, we pray. We can't take ourselves out of the new covenant either. It's made only with the houses of Israel and Judah, no one else. You can't add yourself to it. And those of us who are in it, we can't leave because it's a gift, it's a promise. All of Israel is saved. It's a covenant made with a seed, with a race. You can't change your race. The only way you could leave the new covenant is if you changed your race. Well, that's not going to happen. So there's no way to leave a covenant. There's no way to enter a covenant.
You're either born under the covenant or you're not.
Period.
And David wrote that, thou art my God from my mother's belly. He was born under that covenant. He was born under that law. And you're either born of God or you're born of corruption. So yeah, it's your origination. It's racial. And the thing is that this new covenant, it's based on like it says in Luke 1, to keep the promise to the fathers. And then you mentioned Galatians 3. Well, in Galatians 3, we're not justified by the rituals. We're justified by faith. Abraham trusted Yahweh and it was counted to him for righteousness. Then you know that they from faith, they are the sons of Abraham. And the writing hath foreseen that from faith Yahweh would deem the nations righteous. So that's the new covenant here. The old covenant, the perfection of beauty. But I just wanted to read that part about the law, that you can't add people to the law, as Paul said in Galatians 3. Brethren, verse 15, brethren, I speak as befits a man, even a validated covenant of man, no one sets aside or makes additions to for himself. Now Abraham, the promises have been spoken, and to his offspring. Now this I say, a covenant validated beforehand by Yahweh, the law which arrived after 430 years does not invalidate, by which the promise is left idle. So there it's saying you can't make additions even to a covenant between men. So why these people here in Psalm 50 taking the covenant of Yahweh in their mouths, they're trying to add themselves to the covenant of God. And like Christ told us, there would be those who would seek to enter the kingdom of God by violence. That's violence, because you're trying to take away the heritage of the children of Israel for yourself. You're trying to rob us. And that's the time of Jacob's trouble, which is mentioned here in Psalm 50. We're in a time of trouble because we're being persecuted by our brother, the Edomites, and they're trying to take the covenant of God on themselves and add themselves into the covenant. And I guess they're hoping to enter the kingdom of God. But we see that's not going to happen. At Matthew 25, they don't get to enter the kingdom of God. And I think as we read on here in Psalm 50, there's still a few points here.
Well, you just said they're trying to rob us. Well, when you saw a thief, then you consented with him.
Yeah, good.
And in the near vision, because we were talking about Christ and his dialogue with the Pharisees, well, in that same near vision, I would say that's Judas. Because Judas, as John said, was a thief. And these Pharisees, whom are being addressed here in the near vision, consented with Judas when they conspired to give him money so that Judas would hand over Christ to them. So that was them consenting with a thief. In the near vision.
Definitely.
Yeah.
That's great, hey, because Judas was a thief and he's one of the Edomites. He's doing exactly what it says here. It's prophetic.
Yeah.
And I love how you described them taking the covenant of God on themselves as an act of thiefdom. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah, they're thieves. They're thieves. And this psalm just blows my mind, man. It really does. It just, I wonder how it escaped our notice. How this escaped our notice, but everything's under Yahweh's timing.
Well, yeah, it is, because just how perfectly it fits with so many other things, so many other pillars of CI, of Christianity, true Christianity. Yeah, it's great. It's so easy to connect it to John 8 and Matthew 25. And Do you want to read the last few verses?
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to read the last few. I'm just going to read one, and then we'll do the last two, because this one, verse 21, there's just so much to say with that one verse. This has to be one of my, and we've talked about this before privately, how our favorite verses, our favorite chapters, our favorite books change on a day-to-day basis. Well, right now, verse 21 has to be one of my favorite verses in the Bible. These things have you done, and I kept silence. You thought that I was altogether such a one as yourself, but I will reprove you or convict you and set in order before your eyes. How many people today think that Jesus was a Jew? Basically, everyone, most people, and even the Jews themselves think that. You thought that I was altogether such a one as yourself. Because remember, this is also Christ speaking, because we saw his second coming at the beginning of this psalm. You thought that the Messiah was going to be a Jew? No. He has nothing to do with you. He is nothing like you. Your character is in no way like his character. You are completely different entities.
Yeah.
He is not like you. And you can see Yahweh mocking them. You thought that I was altogether such a one as yourself. It's like, you read that and you're like shaking your head as you read it. It's like, you fool. You were so wrong.
And he will convict them.
And
I
he
love
will
it too, man.
convict them.
And he will convict them. But altogether, such as one as thyself. Well, Yahweh isn't saying here that you thought I was evil and you thought I was a thief and you thought all these other things. It's racial here.
Yeah.
And you thought, he was some sort of mongrel Jew. No. In Hebrews 2, and this is the first verse I think of, and this will help us link it to some other things. 2:16, for verily he took not on him the nature of angels, but he took on him the seed of Abraham. So we know that Christ was a legitimate heir of Abraham. And in John 8, we have those born of fornication, and him saying, well, you're not a true heir. Obviously, Christ is doing the works of Abraham. He's born of God. Christ says, I've come from God. So he's born of Abraham. But these people here, they're totally different character, as you said. And he's going to reprove them because of that and set it in order before thy eyes. So how is he different to these people? It's racial. It has to be. It can't be, because we've got to remember, Noble, like the wife is of the same flesh as the husband. In Genesis, it's flesh of thy flesh and bone of thy bone. So if this nation, Israel, is the wife of God, they're of the same flesh as God is. They're of the same flesh as Christ is, because the marriage law is flesh of thy flesh and bone of thy bone. We're all of one body, the apostles teach. We're of one flesh. Us with Christ, we're all of one body. So for these people to not be part of that body and to be of a different, altogether different, that means that to me, this is racial. They're not born of Abraham. They're born of the wicked one. They've claimed to be born of, just as in John 8. In John 8, they're like, no, we were born of Abraham. We're born of God. And says, if God, Christ replies to them and says, if you were born of Abraham, if you were born of God. And then they reply, we were not born of fornication. Well, here they were partakers with adulterers. So this whole thing, the way that he's not altogether such as them, is racial to me. That's exactly what it's saying here. And I'm thinking of John 8, and we know that Christ was a true heir. We have his genealogy, and that's why the genealogy is so important. And we know that the wife has to be the same race as the husband. That's in the law.
If you're not the same flesh, you're not that perfection of beauty. You can't be. You can't be one of those saints who are that perfection of beauty. And when he says, I'm not one as yourself, like you said, that's in John 8. not the same race as them. He accuses them as being born of fornication. And he's right, that's a conviction. And that's the near vision, I would say, here in Psalm 50 of his dialogue with the Pharisees, where he's saying, "You're born of fornication. I'm not one like yourself." And I think another good cross reference would be the Wisdom of Solomon in 2:16, and you know how much we love the Wisdom of Solomon, and
it's canon, man.
It is canon, and it is scripture, and you're a fool if you think otherwise. If you have read it, if you have read the Wisdom of Solomon, you finished the book, and you didn't think that was scripture, then I don't know what's wrong with you. But I'm going to read from the CNT version, from Bill William Finck's translation. Wisdom 2:16. By him, by Christ, by him we are reckoned as spurious, and he abstains from our ways as from uncleanliness. He pronounces blessed the ends of the just, and boasts that God is Father. All of that is in Psalm 50 except boasts that God is Father, right? Reckoned as spurious, check. Abstains from our ways as from uncleanliness, check. You consent with thieves, etc. He pronounces blessed the ends of the just, check. You see all of that in Psalm 50.
And I mean, the covenant here is then racial, because if you're not all together as he is, you're not the same race as he is, then the covenant and law doesn't apply to you. This explains why. This is another point that explains why they can't have the covenant: by belief. If everything's by belief, why can't they have the covenant? Oh, it's because they're of a totally different character. They're from a totally different patriarch, the other brother of thine own mother. So they're of the other patriarch. Who's that? It's Cain and it's Esau. And it's basically saying here, that part there where it says, "Thou thoughtest that I was altogether such as oneself," that's basically him saying, "You're not the same race as me." When Jesus says the same thing to those born of fornication.
This is why it's like my favorite verse in the Bible right now. Like, this is a verse where it's just Jesus says, where Yahshua says, "I'm not a Jew. I'm not a Jew." I'm not, like, I mean, that's you find that throughout the Bible, but it's a bit more nuanced in certain places. But here it's like, Christ is not Jewish, and he's going to convict them. That's the conviction of the goat nations, because after he finishes judging them, where do they go? The lake of fire. That's their next step. There isn't a little room for forgiveness and counseling. They go straight to the lake of fire. They are destroyed. They're as if they never existed.
But they'll try to make a deal, but they're not going to get one. I mean,
they're going to try.
Yeah, because they think that they can promote the idea that it's belief and that they can worm their way into the kingdom by claiming, "Oh, there's a universal brotherhood of man," and all this other stuff, and now they're in the priesthood and all this. But God's going to convict them anyways, because it's not to do with what man thinks or anything like that. God is judge. As it says right from the beginning of this psalm, God is judge, Salah. It's not according to anything they can do. They can never add themselves to this covenant. He doesn't even want them to have anything to do with them. He doesn't want them to have the covenant in their mouths. He doesn't want them to repent. Why? He wants nothing to do with them. And so he's just going to convict them based on what they are, because here it says, "Thou thoughtest that I was altogether such as one as thyself, but I will convict thee." So he's convicting them because of what they are, and set them in order before thine eyes. So this is what he's actually done here. He's set the convictions before their eyes. He's set, that's the list of things they have done has been set before them. This is the judgment for them. So as we said, there's two judgments. The first judgment was for the benefit of his people. They're justified. This part where he says, "I will convict thee and set them in order before thine eyes," that's their list of convictions. And just above, it's that you're a partaker with idolaters. Like, go back to Matthew 25 and look at the judgment of nations there, and you can see that one nations produces good fruit and does the works of Abraham. They have good fruits. They're taking care of their brethren and so on. And then the goat nations have a list of convictions against them. Well, here we have a list of convictions set before their eyes. So there's two judgments. There's two races of people. They're being convicted because of their race. You know, that's how they're identified racially, and that's it. It is, like we've said the whole time, that's why this psalm is so important.
Well, what you just noticed is so important, that the conviction comes after the racial revelation. Like, why is it placed there? Because ultimately, what is being said here is that ultimately they're not being convicted for the thievery, for the adultery, for the lying, because even the saints earlier have done those things, right? We're all sinners. The children of Israel they sin, and we still sin, but we have a propitiation, so that when we sin, our sin is not accounted to us, and that's in First John. So ultimately, here in Psalm 50, verse 21, he's not convicting them because of the afore described sins. He just uses that as proof that they're not the people of the covenant. What he actually convicts them for is the fact that they're not the same people as himself. That's where the final conviction comes from. It comes from origin, because origin is destiny. So he's
Exactly.
convicting them for their race, and that's how it ends. And I think this
And
verse reads a little better in the ESV. These things you have done, and I have been silent. You thought that I was one like yourself, but now I rebuke you and lay the charge before you. That's the
yeah,
charge.
that's
That's the
perfect.
charge.
And just before that, like you're saying, that just before he convicts them, there's the racial revelation. Well, just before that, in verse 20, it's one of the convictions is speaking against thy brother. So it's racial there too. So he leads down and then it becomes racial, and it's all revealed there. But you go back up to verse 4 and you find that he's judging his people. So his people aren't sinless. They're not being justified because they're sinless, that he may judge his people. And we discussed how they were covered by the sacrifice. You know, all their sins are covered by the sacrifice, and a fire shall devour before him. So the works of his people are tried. Our people are not sinless. They're not going to heaven and being shown mercy because they're sinless. And God's even saying here that all these sacrifices they've made of bulls and goats, they don't really mean anything to him. What's important to him is he's just having mercy on them. Because they have a covenant with him, he made a promise to Abraham, call upon me in the day of trouble and I will deliver thee, because of who they are. This is the first brother that he's having mercy on. He's going to deliver them because they have this covenant with him. And then this second group, they're not being convicted because they're all the sinners. The reason, like you said, that is given is racial.
It's the fulfillment of promises. He promised to Jacob that he will save him, and he has. He has promised to the descendants of Esau and all the other wicked races that he will destroy them, and he will. It's just the fulfillment of two distinct promises to two distinct peoples, not based on works, not based on behavior, but based on origin, and the behavior is exemplary of that origin.
And what do you think about these things hast thou done, and I kept silence?
Well, in Romans 9, Paul says that Yahweh has furnished the vessels of destruction, the vessels of wrath, furnished for destruction. He has wrought them with patience. He has wrought them with patience because they're doing all these horrible, despicable things right now, which we can't even talk about. As Paul says in Ephesians, they're just too disgusting and abominable to talk about. And Yahweh is hiding his face. He's hiding his face from the children of Israel on account of our sins because of our captivity. He doesn't reveal his face again until the end. And you see that in Ezekiel 39. So he's keeping silence. He's allowing them, these things have you done. He's allowing them to do these horrible things for a time. For a time. But now in Psalm 50, we're getting insight into the time where he's not silent anymore. And this is his conviction. This is when he's no longer hiding his face from his people because it's the second coming. He's returned.
Yeah, he was silent for a time and now his judgment is manifest. And, you know, this part about him being silent, it reminds me of Psalm 14, and there's another good cross-reference in wisdom, but the fool says in his heart, there is no God. So they say, they're just going to do whatever they want and not live by the law of God, and they can't live by it. So they are corrupt. Their deeds are vile. There is none who does good. So they say there is no God. God is silent. This is what the Jews say today. The Jews say there is no God. He's silent. We'll never have to bear his judgment. But then we see in this psalm, he was silent for a time. And he let them act up for a time, and he let them try his people and persecute his people for a time for their own sins. But then he reveals his judgment, and at that time his people are justified and they're destroyed. The pattern in history is that he always chastises his people and then destroys the tools of that chastisement, which happened with many ancient nations that were used to chastise Israel, and then those nations were destroyed, like the Assyrians and Babylonians. And it's going to be the same pattern with the Jews and the rest of them. Once our people repent, they're chastised for a time, they see the error of their ways, and they turn back to Yahweh, and that chastisement is no more. They're destroyed.
That chastisement, that education is finished when the people cry out. We're still in the silence, but reading this psalm is just another bright glimmer of hope. Because Paul, he said that the prophets are there for our encouragement so that we will have hope. And we already had hope, but now we're just seeing a great prophetic insight. Like Paul said, we're looking through a mirror with riddles. We're looking through it and we're seeing a glimpse of that day where Christ justifies his people and condemns the Edomites. And that day will come. And that will be a glorious day. It couldn't come soon enough.
No.
Seriously. But it will come
Definitely.
under his own timing. And his timing is perfect. And even Paul in 2 Thessalonians, where he's speaking of the man of lawlessness. And that man of lawlessness is a type for the Sadducees who are in the temple proclaiming themselves to be gods. Well, essentially all of the Sadducees were Edomites because Herod, he filled that party with his own kin. It was a racial party for all intents and purposes. So that man of lawlessness, that high priest there in 2 Thessalonians 2, is a type for all Edomites. And Paul, he says in that epistle that the man of lawlessness will be revealed in his own time. And then in Romans 9, he says that when the vessels of wrath are destroyed, that makes manifest the abundance of Yahweh's mercy on the vessels, the abundance of Yahweh's favor, I think it is, on the vessels of mercy. So we see there in Romans 9 and 2 Thessalonians 2 that our people don't realize the racial identity of the Jews until the very end. That's when they're finally made manifest. And that when they're made manifest, the abundance of his favor on us is also made manifest. And that's what we're seeing again in this psalm, that they're being exposed, they're being convicted. It's like they're being found out. They're being found out, and their genealogy is being shown to their face, and they're being stamped illegitimate. They're being convicted because of their descent, and the children of the vessels of mercy are being shown favor.
Well, every nation's judged according to its fruit, and we know that a bad tree does not produce good fruit. So that's the judgment of God. It's according to his creation. And that's what you would expect with the creator God, Yahweh. He created all things. He created this law to preserve his creation. And then his judgment is according to origin or to what you actually are. It's not according to how he feels about your feelings or anything that's within the realms of men, because within his power is all creation. It's according to what he created, and that's the sovereignty of God. And so it says, now consider this, ye that forget God, lest I tear you in pieces and there be none to deliver, right? So if we go back a bit in the psalm, there's this group has cast his word behind them. He's cast his law behind them, and they've forgotten God. And what's the fate of such people who forget God and forget his law? They're torn to pieces, and there is none to deliver. They have no salvation. And so this makes me want to turn to the wisdom of Solomon again. And it speaks of those who despiseth wisdom and nurture. He is miserable, and their hope is vain. Their labours unfruitful, and their works unprofitable. Their wives are foolish, and their children wicked. Their offspring is cursed. Wherefore, blessed is the barren that is undefiled, which hath not known the sinful bed. She shall have fruit in the visitation of souls. If I back up to verse 10, which is where I should have said, but the ungodly shall be punished according to their own imaginations, which have neglected the righteous and forsaken Yahweh. So what we have here is Israelites that took foolish wives when they turned away from God and from his law, and they became like the Edomites, like the Canaanites. They took cursed, foolish wives, and their children became wicked, and their offspring is cursed, and they have no fruit. And so even someone who has no children shall have fruit in the visitation of souls, because they didn't know a sinful bed. That's Wisdom 3:10 to 13. And so you go back to the Psalm here, second, and you find that those who have forgotten God, there's no salvation for them. How have they forgotten God? They've forgotten God to the point that their sins can't be forgiven anymore. Their children have become cursed, and you go back in this psalm, and it's they have cast their words behind thee. They hated instruction, right? That's the people who intermixed with the Edomites and became Edomites themselves. That's Esau. Esau was actually an Israelite. He was in the loins of Isaac, and he hated God's instruction. He hated God's covenant. This is one of the brothers. We're saying this psalm is about two brothers. One of the brothers hated the instruction of God. He hated the word of God. He went and made himself a partaker with adulterers, right? And so then you have the stuff about hateth thy mother's son, and slandereth the mother's son, and that. We have all the stuff about the brother here, Esau. Now, and then to verse 22, which I just read. Now consider this, ye that forgot God. Esau forgot God, and now his offspring are cursed, as it says in Wisdom. And just as in John 8, we have those who can no longer perceive the words of Christ because they are Edomites. They were born of fornication, and there's none to deliver. There's no hope for them. They can't be saved. He doesn't want them to repent. He doesn't want the covenant in their mouths. He doesn't want them talking about his law, because they're not going to be justified by it. And so that's what I see here when I see, now consider this, ye that forget God.
What you just said is so profound, because you're right. I'm noticing now that a lot of this, maybe not all of it, but a lot of it applies just as well to the patriarch and not just to the descendants. A lot of what's being said here just applies to Esau. When Esau,
Two brothers.
Yeah, to the two brothers, not just their descendants, but actually like you said earlier, like the events as they're described in Genesis, like what actually happened in Genesis. Because Esau, he sold his birthright for pottage. He sold it. And then after he sold it, as Paul wrote, he tried to take it back with tears, and he wasn't able to get it back. He couldn't.
No. Sorry,
Yeah,
man.
No, it's fine. Like he was trying to get it back with tears. Well, verse 16, or that you should take my covenant in your mouth. So with the descendants, that's the old covenant. But with the patriarch, that's the Abrahamic covenant, because he was trying to get back that inheritance. It's like, no, you gave it to Jacob. You hated instruction. You mixed your seed. So you're not getting that Abrahamic covenant back. It went to Jacob. You're not getting it back. You hated instruction. What instruction did Esau have? The law wasn't given yet. The only instruction he had was the law given to Adam, not to mix his seed, and there's only a few laws given to Noah. That's all he had. and he mixed his seed with Hittites.
Exactly. That's a great point.
It's
That the only law he had was flesh of thy flesh and bone of thy bone. And Esau didn't even obey that. He didn't take a wife, flesh of thy flesh and bone of thy bone. Adam was told that that was the standard for marriage at the time of Adam. Eve was flesh of thy flesh and bone of thy bone. And Esau went against that. And that showed that he hated the covenant. You can't take that covenant in your mouth anymore. You've taken, corrupt wives, foolish wives, as the wisdom of Solomon has it.
Right.
And now you have cursed children. A good tree doesn't produce bad fruit, neither does a bad tree produce good fruit. That's children, man.
It's amazing how this applies just as well to the patriarch. Like, that's the beauty of the Bible, man. That the depth of it, the layers, the compounding. It's like a strand of DNA swirling, and all these points interlink, and it's incredible. But
it is.
it's
so. Sorry, man. You say I was just going to say, like, this is Esau's life.
It is.
He was an adulterer. He was, and this is what his offspring became. Because as we're reading verse 22, you forgot you forgot God, and now you're being torn in pieces, and there's none to deliver. Your offspring, there's none to deliver them. And this is his life. He made a consent with them. He became an adulterer and mixed his seed. And then he was against his own mother's son. This is Esau.
Well, none to deliver his seed. Psalm 137 says that his children, the infants of his seed, will be dashed against the rocks. That's them being torn to pieces. That's them being dashed to pieces against a rock.
They haven't changed.
For his seed. No.
They haven't changed. They're still slandering us today. They're still pretending they have the covenant today. They're doing exactly what their fathers did. They're still trying to corrupt the creation of God today against his law with adultery, and they're still thieves today. They're still, all the seed of Esau has become this. And that's how Esau is doing it too, because Esau was impious. Now his seed can't be saved. Now his seed is slandering the white race, their brother. The Jews are slandering us. They're the seed of Esau. They're the Edomites. We're the seed of Jacob. They're slandering us. They're still doing it today. They killed Christ. Now they're trying to kill us and erase Christians. Everything that's described here is exactly what the Jews are doing today, and it's exactly what their forefathers did. They're still doing it today.
And kind after kind wasn't the only law Esau was under. And one of the laws which were given to Noah was, thou shalt not murder. You shall not, anyone who sheds blood, his blood will be requited of him. So that's another law Esau was under, and he wanted to kill Jacob. He actually sought to kill Jacob. That was, again, him hating instruction. It was against the law for him to kill Jacob. So that's,
and him hating his brother.
Yeah. So it's not just kind after kind. There are a few laws, well, at least two there, and in the spirit of the law, which he's breaking.
And they're still doing it today. Like, that's still their nature today. They haven't changed. They can't repent. God doesn't expect them to repent. Instead, he's just going to convict them. Like this, some of this is in the past. That's why this psalm is so brilliant. And obviously it's the word of our God. So some of this is in the past. Some of it harkens back to the beginning, and some of it is still in our future. And so we find that no, they're not going to repent. That's not an option for them. God's going to convict them, and we're awaiting that judgment. They're not going to change. We shouldn't expect them to change. We should understand that they're accursed. They're not under the law of God. They can't be brought under the law of God. So that's the way it is today, just as it was back then.
Should we read the last verse?
Yeah.
You go ahead, my friend.
Whoso offers praise glorifieth me, and to him that ordereth his conversation aright will I show the salvation of God.
So there's a meta level here. that we were talking about just a couple weeks ago. And
There is, yeah.
yeah, do you think you want to talk about that? Because you were seeing it more than I was.
Well, the first thing I want to look at is the word conversation there.
Right.
So in that conversation there isn't necessarily like ordering a speech or something like that. That's actually an archaic. The KJV is using an archaic meaning of the word conversation. So I'm turning to the NASB and reading it from there, and it says, "He who offers a sacrifice of thanksgiving honors me, and to him who orders his way aright, I will show the salvation of God." So it's someone who orders his whole life according to God. That's who he will show the salvation of God to. And the important thing here I see is that he's not saying who believes in God, who lives, who's a good boy, right? It's not saying that those people are saved. It's saying those people are shown the salvation of God. So he's revealing the mystery of the salvation of God to people who seek him and his law. Now, what's his law? His law is only for Israel. His covenant's only for Israel. So if you're seeking to order your life according to his way, you're seeking that racial law, that racial covenant, and then the salvation of God is revealed to you. And what's revealed to you? The nature of salvation is racial. There are people who are going to be saved because they were of this first group who has a covenant with God, that because they're of God and of the children of Israel and born of God. And there's another group who are convicted, just as in Matthew 25, and they go off into hell because of their nation. It's the judgment of nations. Christ divides sheep nations and goat nations, not good people and bad people. He's not dividing by which church you go to. Southern Baptist on my right hand and Catholics on my left hand. And, the Catholics win. The Catholics lose. It's not according to any of that. Here,
Yeah.
he's only showing the salvation of of God. He's revealing it to us. And I think that's the Elijah ministry, as we call it, because it's revealing, it's ending us, maybe you can quote that for me, the turning the hearts of the fathers to the children and the hearts of the children to the fathers. And that's something that we understand, because we understand that the law was only for Israel. So he's revealing to us the truth of his salvation, the nature of his salvation. It's not saying here only good people are saved, and it's saying and bad white people go to hell. No, it's a racial division. Good sheep, good nations. That's your birth, your origin. Nation comes from a word which means birth. So it's according to your birth, just as David said, "Thou art my God from my mother's belly." He wasn't a baby and declaring Christian precepts or something like that. He was born into this. He was born under the law. He was born into this covenant, and that's the truth of the salvation of God that has been revealed in this psalm.
And I was just saying earlier, how could this have escaped our notice for so long? But this is the showing of the salvation of God. This is that, like you said, it's reserved for it seems to be like the third ministry of Elijah. It's an understanding of how this salvation works, an understanding of what this psalm means, and the synergy of the Bible and the covenants, how they interact with one another, and how you're convicted and how you're saved, how you're
By
preserved
race.
and how you're not. It's all by race, and that's showing the salvation of God. That's an understanding of it.
Yeah, sorry to interject there, man. I get a bit excited reading
I'm
this.
excited. Like,
And
it's
we
just,
don't. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm excited to share this with our brethren. Like, this psalm is mind blowing. I don't know. I feel like I'm reading the wisdom of Solomon again for the first time. I don't know.
But in a single chapter, single chapter, because this is the Bible from beginning to end. And this conclusion here is actually the purpose of this whole chapter, to reveal what the salvation of God is. That's why it's in the conclusion. I will show to them who has ordered his ways, or I shall show the salvation of God. That's exactly what this whole psalm's about. Because in this psalm, you have two brothers, two patriarchs of two different races. You have two covenants and you have two judgments. Well, you don't have two covenants. You have one that has the covenant and one that doesn't have the covenant, and he doesn't even want it in their mouths, even though they're trying to take it upon themselves. So two brothers, two covenants, two judgments, two salvations, if I can put it like that. Well, the salvation of God, that's the purpose of this psalm, is described in the conclusion.
It's a tearing in pieces for Esau and
Yeah,
salvation
that's
for
it,
Jacob.
yeah. Exactly. That's a better way to put it. I like that. So it's revealed. That's the whole purpose of this psalm, and that's what I think it's saying here is, hey, this psalm is revealing the truth of salvation. There's two brothers, one's convicted, and it's not by behavior, because it's obvious that when he's addressing the Israelites, that they're not being delivered or brought to the kingdom because of their own works. They're judged too, and they're sinners too. So it's not by behavior, it's by which brother do you come from. Do you come from Cain and Esau? And do you have a part with the fallen angels who corrupted the creation of God, contrary to the law of God, and therefore you don't have a part in his covenants or law? You actually exist contrary to his law, contrary to the law of flesh of marriage, which is flesh of thy flesh and bone of thy bone, kind after kind. So they exist contrary to kind after kind, because they're mongrels. So you're either part of that brother who's convicted here, or you're part of the first brother who's shown mercy. And the attitude God has towards them is completely different. It's night and day here. We are the children of the light and they're the children of darkness. God just says to them, call upon me in the day of trouble. I shall rescue and you will honor me. That's what he wants for them. But to the wicked, don't even take my covenant in your mouth. It's so obvious, man. And that's the truth of salvation. That's what this psalm is about the truth of salvation as we believe it. The Elijah ministry.
As we
know it. It's been
it.
revealed to us. I mean, here it says, I will show the salvation of God to, these people who seek his way.
I don't know how to sum it up better than what you just did. I can't sum it up any better. That's the psalm. It's a racial psalm. Two brothers, one has a covenant and one is a pretender to that covenant. It's just a psalm of origin of two brothers. It's like a tale of two cities. Well, a tale of two brothers. This is a psalm of the judgment of two brothers. It's Jacob and Esau summarized in some of the most profound language that you could imagine. That's the word of our God, like you said. The whole Bible's like that, and that's why it's such a gift to always go back to the Bible, and you think you've read the Psalms, and you're like, oh, I've read the Psalms. They're prophecies. Many of the Psalms, if not all of them, are prophetic. And every time you go back to the Bible, you notice something new. You notice some new aspect of that salvation of God. It's a gift that keeps giving. And this psalm, I really hope our brethren, I really hope this is edifying for them, because this psalm is just a wonder, and I think it's an excellent tool in our toolkit.
Well, the last thing I would say is that just as at Matthew 25 reaches right back to the beginning, because it's about origin, it's about your nation, which is your origin, and then it reaches into the future to the final judgment. That passage is so important, the judgment of nations, because it can only be understood within the Elijah ministry. We call it CI sometimes, but really we don't like those terms. It's just true Christianity. It's the true Christian message. And so Matthew 25 goes right back to the beginning and then explains why these people are judged, condemned by God, and it goes right into the future. These people enter the kingdom of God, and that's probably a new beginning, but it goes right back from beginning to end, origin and destiny. And that's exactly what this Psalm 50 does. It's origin and destiny. You're either a son or a bastard, as Paul said. Well, here you're either one son, you're either one brother, I should say, that has the covenant, or you're of the other brother who was a partaker with a adulteress, born of fornication. And so in that part is explained well in John 8. But that's why this is so important. It goes right back into the beginning, and then we're still waiting for this to be fulfilled, the final judgment of God, the final sacrifice, and so on, the kingdom come. It's it's an overview of the whole Bible, just as Matthew 25 is.
Yeah, it's a summary of the Bible. And just like in Matthew 25, they're convicted based on ethnos. They're convicted based on race, but their behavior is used in Matthew 25 as exemplary of that origin, of that ethnos, of that race. So here in Psalm 50, they're convicted or blessed or saved based on race, but their behavior is exemplary of that race. So the wicked are condemned because they're not the same race and they're convicted for it, but their behavior, their thievery, their adultery, their lying, their slander is exemplary of that origin. And in this other group who order their conversation, who order their conduct, who make a covenant with Yahweh by sacrifice, these people, their behavior is exemplary of their origin. So that all goes back as well to the wisdom of Solomon, because as Solomon wrote, Yahweh knew and he knows that they're a cursed seed from the beginning, but he gives them time, just as it says here. He's patient. He keeps silence. Verse 21, he keeps silence. He gives it time so that everyone can see the fruits of that cursed seed, so that they will understand in the end that Yahweh God is just. He is just in destroying that seed because their fruits are wicked. And he is just in condemning and convicting this wicked seed, this evil brother, and his descendants, not himself. He's justified in convicting them because of their fruits, and their fruits are exemplary of that origin. It's like you said, it's the story of the Bible.
As Christ said, like in the parables of Christ, like a bad tree, as we keep saying, a bad tree does not produce good fruit. Well, in the parable of the wheat and the tares, he explains their origin as being from the adversary, and then they're judged according to that.
You know, I wonder if we read the Septuagint, if there would be new things to look at. Maybe we'll do that another time. I don't know. Or maybe the Septuagint's really similar. But this has been great. I'm saying this because I don't want it to end. Because
well, the last thing
so enjoyable. Yeah.
I keep saying the last thing, but there was one thing that I almost forgot, which is it's 2 verse 21, I think, where it says these things hast thou done, and I kept silence, right? And you mentioned that again just before. Well, doesn't Christ say to his angels, let them grow together unless you root up the wheat with the tares? So that's why he's letting them grow together, because in time, every Adamic man is given time to repent. He's given enough time to repent because God can foresee these things so that he can have some good works, because God wants every white man to repent and have some good works in his kingdom. And he also has to let them reveal their own nature through their fruits. So that's why Christ said, let them grow together until the end time, lest you root up the wheat with the tares. And that's exactly what we see here in verse 21. He kept silence. He waited he was patient. And that's the truth of salvation, is that it is by race, and then every man is rewarded according to their works. And that's Psalm 50. That's why it's so important.
That's how I would sum up this psalm. The truth of salvation. Like you just said it there.
And that's exactly what that's exactly what the last verse says,
yeah,
bro.
Great.
So I will
Yahweh
show the
is
salvation of God. That's the whole psalm, isn't it?
Yahweh is a poet. And that's
He is. Well, praise Yahweh.
Praise Yahweh. Like, this has been great. Thank you so much for coming on. This has been wonderful, truly.
Yeah, no, it's great that we did this together,
Praise Yahweh, and maybe we'll do stuff like this in the future. Maybe we'll do a few more psalms. Maybe we'll do another book. That could be great too, because the Bible never ends, and you never know what Yahweh
you'll
may
find.
show you. Yeah,
Yeah,
praise
exactly. What
Yahweh.
he will show to us regarding salvation and all the other things, like he's done with this
Indeed.
psalm.
Praise
Praise
Yahweh for
Christ.
this gift, and this is a gift. So praise Yahweh for this. Praise Yahweh, the God of Israel, the God of Jacob, and not the God of the Edomites. Praise him.
Mighty One, our God, the Lord, speaks and summons all the earth, rising sun to setting place. From Zion, our God shines forth. Our God comes, his voice is heard. Wind around him, fire before. Bring to me my sacred ones. The heavens obey, for God is judge. Hear, O people, as I speak. I don't need your food or drink. Make your vows and see them through. You honor me, I'll deliver you. Hear, O wicked, as I speak. What right have you to talk of me? You hate instruction, join the thief. Your mouth and tongue fit for deceit. I've seen everything you do. You thought I was just like you. I've kept silent, yes, it's true. You thought I was just like you, but you will receive rebuke. You thought I was just like you. To your face I will accuse. You thought I was just like you. 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 You thought I was just like you.